You have probably seen it happen. A child walks into the yard. Slow, distracted, not thinking about the birds at all. And the birds stay. A cardinal holds its branch. A chickadee keeps eating. Nobody flushes. Then an adult walks out. Calm, quiet, well-meaning. And the feeder empties in seconds. Same yard. Same birds. Same feeder. Different human. And nobody ever talks about why. What birds are doing when they look at a child is not what most people think. It is not innocence they are responding to. It is not smallness. It is something far more specific, far more measurable, and far more revealing about what birds are actually reading in every human they encounter. Welcome to Backyard Birds Whisper. If you are new here, subscribe before you keep watching, because what you are about to learn will change the way you look at every person who walks into your yard, including yourself. Today we are going into the science of why birds consistently show lower fear responses around children than adults, what they are actually detecting, and what that tells us about the signals we are sending without knowing it. Stay until the end because the last thing we cover is something you can actually change about yourself, starting tomorrow morning. It is not about size. It is about threat geometry. The first thing most people assume is that birds are less afraid of children because children are smaller. Smaller means less dangerous. Less dangerous means less fear. Simple. But that is not what the research shows. Birds are not measuring absolute size. They are measuring behavioral signatures. The specific combination of movement speed, movement predictability, gaze direction, body orientation, and sound pattern that their nervous systems have learned to associate with predatory intent. A study from the University of Exeter examining fear responses in urban birds found that the key variable triggering flight was not the size of the approaching human but the approach pattern. Direct approach, sustained eye contact, and unpredictable movement speed triggered flight at much greater distances than indirect movement, averted gaze, and consistent slow pace. Children, particularly young children, almost never approach birds directly. They meander. They look at other things. They stop and start without the purposeful forward momentum that a predator uses when closing distance. Their gaze wanders. Their body is rarely oriented squarely toward the bird for more than a second or two. Adults, even calm, well-intentioned adults, tend to walk with directional purpose. They look at the bird they are hoping to observe. They orient their body toward it. They move at a consistent pace that birds have learned across millions of years to recognize as the movement signature of an animal that knows where it is going. The bird is not responding to age. It is responding to a behavioral profile. And children, without knowing it, accidentally produce a much safer profile than most adults ever do. What children do with their eyes that adults almost never do. Of all the signals birds monitor in humans, gaze is one of the most powerful. And this is where children and adults differ most dramatically. Direct, sustained eye contact is a predator signal across almost every prey species on Earth. When a hawk locks onto a bird, it stares. When a cat prepares to strike, it fixes its gaze. The unbroken focused stare of a large animal is one of the oldest danger signals in vertebrate evolution. Adults who love birds, people who have been watching them for years, people who are genuinely trying to be still and non-threatening, almost always make the same mistake. They look directly at the bird. They watch it carefully because they want to see it clearly. And the bird reads that sustained focused gaze as predatory attention. Children look at everything. A child in a yard with birds is also looking at a bug on the ground, a cloud moving overhead, something interesting near the fence. Their gaze is scattered, brief, constantly redirecting. From a bird's perspective, that gaze pattern reads as non-predatory. An animal that is not hunting does not stare at one thing. Ornithologists studying human-bird interaction have noted that experienced birdwatchers who deliberately practice averted gaze, looking at birds through peripheral vision rather than direct focus, consistently get closer to wild birds than observers who watch directly. The birds respond not to the person's intent but to the gaze pattern their nervous system is producing. Children produce the right gaze pattern by accident. Most adults have to learn it deliberately. The sound signature. What birds hear when adults and children move. Beyond movement and gaze, birds are monitoring sound. And the sound profile of a child moving through a yard is fundamentally different from the sound profile of an adult. Adult movement through a space tends to be purposeful and rhythmic. Regular footsteps. Consistent pace. The sound pattern of an animal moving with intention. Birds that share habitat with large predators have learned across generations that regular rhythmic approach sounds mean something is coming toward them deliberately. Children produce irregular, unpredictable, non-rhythmic sound. They stop. They shuffle. They crouch to look at something and go quiet. They make sounds that have nothing to do with directional movement. From a bird's acoustic monitoring perspective, a child in a yard sounds less like an approaching predator and more like a small animal foraging randomly. There is also the voice dimension. Children speak at higher frequencies than adults. Research on bird alarm thresholds has shown that many common songbirds have lower startle responses to high-frequency sounds than to low-frequency ones, because large predators, the animals birds most need to fear, tend to produce low-frequency vocalizations and footstep sounds. A child's voice sits in a frequency range that birds find less alarming than an adult's lower register. None of this is conscious. The child is not trying to sound non-threatening. The bird is not making a reasoned decision about frequency ranges. Both are operating on systems shaped over millions of years. And the result is that the child's natural voice and movement sounds produce a consistently lower alarm response in the birds nearby. What this reveals about what birds are reading in all of us. Here is where this becomes genuinely interesting. Because if birds are responding to behavioral signatures rather than identity, then what they are actually doing is running a continuous real-time analysis of every human they encounter. And that analysis is picking up things we are not even aware we are broadcasting. The research on human behavioral signatures and bird flight distance shows something remarkable. The variable that most consistently predicts how close a bird will allow a human to approach is not familiarity, not size, not clothing, not how much the person loves birds. It is the coherence and predictability of the human's movement pattern combined with the non-directional quality of their attention. In other words, birds are reading your internal state. Not mystically. Physiologically. A person who is anxious moves differently than a person who is calm. A person who is focused on getting something tends to orient their body toward the goal. A person who is distracted or simply present moves through space in a way that reads as non-purposive. Children are almost always in a state of distributed attention. They are not trying to get the bird. They are just existing in the space where the bird also exists. And that distributed, non-purposive presence is one of the most non-threatening things a large animal can communicate to a small one. What birds are reading in us is not who we are. It is what we want. And the moment we want the bird, the moment our attention sharpens and our body orients and our gaze fixes, the bird knows. Before we have taken a single step toward it. The adults who get it right. And what they do differently. This is not a story about children being special and adults being hopeless. It is a story about a specific set of behaviors that birds respond to, behaviors that adults can learn and practice even if they do not come naturally. The people who consistently get closest to wild birds, the naturalists, the field researchers, the long-term backyard birders who have built genuine proximity with their yard birds, share a set of behaviors that mirror what children do accidentally. They move without destination. When they go outside, they do not walk directly to the feeder or directly to the spot where they usually stand. They move through the yard indirectly, stopping, changing direction, behaving like something that is present without being purposive. They look without staring. They have learned to use peripheral vision, to observe birds in their side vision rather than turning to face them directly. Some keep a book or a tool in their hands, something to look at that gives their gaze a reason to be directed away from the bird. They speak softly and at a consistent low volume rather than going completely silent. Complete sudden silence from a large animal is itself a predator signal. A soft continuous sound, humming, quiet talking to oneself, tells nearby birds that the large animal's attention is occupied elsewhere. And they are patient without being watchful. There is a difference between waiting for something and simply being somewhere. Birds can tell the difference. The person who is waiting is oriented toward an outcome. The person who is simply present is not. Children are almost always simply present. It is one of the few things they do better than most adults without trying. I want to end with something that I think is worth sitting with. What birds are reading in children is not innocence in any poetic sense. It is the behavioral signature of a creature that is not hunting, that is not trying to get anything, that is simply existing in a space without agenda. And what that means is this. The quality that makes children less threatening to birds is the same quality that we spend most of our adult lives losing. The ability to be somewhere without needing something from it. To look at a thing without wanting to possess or control or even fully understand it. To simply be present in a space and let whatever is there continue to be there. Birds respond to that quality because their survival depends on reading it accurately. They have been selecting for the ability to detect predatory intent for longer than our species has existed. They are very good at it. When a bird stays near you, when it doesn't flush as you walk past, when it goes on eating while you stand nearby, what it has decided is that you are not hunting, that you are simply there, that your presence does not change what the yard is. That is a remarkable thing to be decided about a person. And if you have ever stood in your yard on an ordinary morning, not thinking about the birds particularly, just present in the space, and looked up to find a cardinal still on its branch watching you with one calm eye, you have already been given that verdict. You just didn't know that was what it meant. Tell me in the comments. Have you ever noticed birds behaving differently around children than adults in your yard? Have you ever caught yourself being watched by a bird that didn't seem afraid? Those moments matter more than most people realize. I read every one. I will see you in the next one.